It's interesting because thinking about this podcast, it's called Creative Control. Because I kind of think those two things often don't go together. I feel like I'm most creative when I'm kind of not in control, at least not consciously in control.
When Riz Ahmed is feeling lost and needs some guidance in his creative endeavors, he asks two questions. Does it stretch me? Does it stretch culture? Those questions have guided Riz to an Oscar and Emmy-winning acting career, a boundary-pushing music catalog, and creating stories that have redefined who gets to be seen at the center of the frame. And now, in the latest chapter of his career, he's posing those two questions to all creatives. Last year, Riz stepped into the role of guest curator at WePresent, the arts platform of file sharing service WeTransfer. And he's launching his role with a manifesto built on that idea of stretching yourself to help stretch culture. And this isn't your regular ho-hum ask of do something that scares you or step outside of your comfort zone. Riz wants your ego to surrender and for you to step out on faith. Things get a bit spiritual here, people. In my conversation with Riz, we explore his creative manifesto, the work he's executing as WePresent's guest curator, and his upcoming version of Shakespeare's Hamlet that ties directly into his vision of stretching culture. But to start, as I always do on this podcast, I wanted to know what was the initial spark that set Riz's creative career in motion.
It's interesting, I feel like the creative spark to want to do those things is something that I just remember was always with me. But the idea and the spark and the confidence to try and pursue a career was something that came very late. And I sometimes joke and say, I'm hoping it will still show up at some point. As a kid, I was just always playing make-believe and making up films, weirdly. I think it's something to do with my uncles, and they're going to be babysitting me. We'll just put on the VHS player, and I was watching age-inappropriate movies like Nightmare on Elm Street and RoboCop as like a 5 and 6 year old. But yeah, honestly, the idea of having a career is something that I wouldn't have pursued unless I had an encouraging nudge from some of my peers. It was when I was leaving university and people were applying for jobs. There was someone who I wouldn't even say was a close friend, but was an acquaintance who reached out and said, look, I hope you're pursuing this. I thought, damn, yeah, maybe I should apply to, acting school. And it was really a series of really kind of like fortuitous events that meant I got in, that I got a scholarship to be able to afford it. And then as I was leaving, I got cast in my first film. But yeah, it was kind of nudge and encouragement that kind of was the spark for me.
That's amazing. And speaking of university, you studied at Oxford, and as the story goes, you almost dropped out because you found it to be very isolating, culturally speaking. And instead of quitting, you started hosting club nights that drew more diverse crowds of people even outside of the university. And I want you to take us back to that moment for just a second, because it seems like a pretty pivotal moment in your career if you think about how you're now creating your own opportunities and making space for others in the work that you do in film and TV and music. And I want to touch on this point because there's so often a fine line between doing something and not doing something. So what was at that inflection point that made you choose doing these nightclub events versus quitting school? Because it seems like your life could have maybe gone a completely different route, but you dug in and said, I'm going to make this situation work for me. So what was at that inflection point for you?
Casey, it's so interesting you're framing like that, because when you put it like that, I look back and I realize, yeah, you're right. That was a total crossroads for me. I felt massively like an outsider at Oxford for many different reasons. I feel like I got my first taste of like real depression, really, like kind of being there and feeling so at sea and disconnected from lots of things, but almost feeling disconnected from myself. And I think the decision to try and do the thing, again, I'll say it came from people that I look up to, in that my brother was at university. I think at that point he may have even been in Manchester or something. He'd started throwing parties. And I myself was used to kind of showing up at house parties and at different events to MC over garage and drum and bass. And, we have our own amazing like kind of dance music culture here in the UK. And so I'd MC over that kind of music at parties. But if I couldn't find a party to MC at, I guess the next logical step was to throw my own. So even then, I would say the encouragement may not have been explicit, but it was implicitly from kind of peers and kind of people that may not realize it, but they were setting an example. That my brother was kind of out there throwing parties, and I was like, well, if doing it myself is the only way I'm going to get to express myself creatively and keep a hold of this thing that I love, which is emceeing, then I guess I'm going to do it. And it's something about the kind of naivety and boldness or stupidity of youth that I just started walking around the city, going up to like nightclub managers and just going, I'm going to be throwing a party. It's next Wednesday. Hundreds of people are going to be there. Do you want it to be at your club or not? And guys were just like, how about it? Can't believe they gave me a shot. And I remember like standing there behind the till on the first day. It's still 10:30 p.m. I'm like, wow, no one is going to come to this thing. I guess I have to quit the university in shame and just like, and it's just in that pocket between 10:30 and 10:45, like everyone shows up for a rave. And yeah, you're right. It kind of changed everything because it meant that there was a space of my own and a space for others to kind of step into. And ever since then, I think it has been a bit of a template for me, the idea that if you're in a place where you feel like you stick out, that's where you should kind of dig in. You can offer a fresh energy there for yourself and for others.
Oh, I love that. And your first major role in a film is in 2006 with The Road to Guantanamo. So it'll be 20 years this June that you've been in the film and TV business. So congratulations. And when you think back of over those 20 years, what insight can you distill from how much you've evolved into yourself within an industry that's evolved so much as well? Because 20 years, it's a long time. And if you think about where Hollywood was way back then.
It's a big question. The main thing I'm thinking is like, man, 20 years. Oh my God. Yeah, like.
And you look the same, by the way. You look
good. Well,
exactly
thank you.
the same.
You took a minute before you said it. So yeah. I mean,
no,
what am I gonna say? I mean,
no, it's the delay. It's the delay. I swear.
Exactly. That's what it is. That's what it is. I mean, I guess like, yeah, definitely. I would hope that I have evolved, and I'd like to think that the industry and our culture has evolved as well in that period of time. I think a big thing for me that's changed like artistically is being willing to draw on from my own personal passions and personal stories and just from my own life and experience. I feel like the seed of acting for me may have been tied to the idea of code switching. Having to code switch a lot culturally between the house and outside the house, from outside the house, and then again to the school that I got a scholarship to go to. There was a lot of code switching. And so I feel like acting was related to the idea of being someone else for someone else on some subconscious level. And I think I started out as an actor more in that kind of mode where playing a role was about becoming a different person, was about research, about looking outside of my own experience for a way to be. And I think the big shift that's happened for me over the years is leaning into the idea that inside each of us is all of us. And so if you can start from a place of truth within yourself, you can actually go anywhere from there, because the truth is we all have the same feelings, we all have the same emotions, we are one. That is the kind of spiritual truth that underpins storytelling and acting and all these things. It reminds us that actually you can find yourself in the other. You can find yourself in another person's story. So I guess like a big shift for me has been leaning into drawing from my own experiences, my own life, my own passions, rather than trying to be someone else. And I guess another way of putting it is I used to think acting was about putting on the mask, and now I feel like it's about taking it off, sharing the specificity of who you are with people.
For sure. And you're doing that amazingly well, and particularly with your relationship with WeTransfer. And this is a company that's been on my radar for quite some time, mainly because I love the fact that most people know WeTransfer is this file sharing service, which it still is, but they have this arts platform called WePresent, which supports emerging artists across film, music, literature, art, etc. And WePresent commissioned your short film, The Long Goodbye, that you created alongside Anil Karia, and it went on to win an Oscar in 2022 for Best Live Action Short Film. So it's this amazing story of like this file sharing service that wound up fueling this Oscar-winning short film. So I'd love it if you can just tell us, like, where did this relationship with WePresent begin, and how did they come to The Long Goodbye to help commission it?
Yeah, I mean, my relationship with WeTransfer came about through Caroline Reason, who's my brand agent, but also just a very close and old friend of mine. And she told me, look, WeTransfer. I was like, yeah, I use them all the time. She's like, well, they are about helping artists. They do that with their service, but they also want to do it kind of more on a case-by-case basis and approach people they think are interesting, see what they want to do. And I have to say, like, I just thought, yeah, right. And I have to say, I mean, I want to kind of like touch wood and hope I don't jinx it, but my experience with WePresent has been a dream in that I've never been asked to curtail, shift, dampen, or suppress my creative instincts in any way. We had this short film idea, myself and Anil, that was tied to my album, The Long Goodbye. I remember we said, all right, let's pitch this to them. There's no way they're ever going to say yes to this. This is too out there. This is too like, I mean, for people who haven't seen the short film, I advise them to check it out on YouTube. I'm very proud of it. But what Anil Karia has done in that short film is really, really monumental. And so him, and it's a mixture of tones and stuff. I don't want to say too much about the film and ruin it for people. But we pitched it to WeTransfer, and we were just waiting for them to go like, yeah, thank you, but this is a bit too intense. This is a bit too much. This isn't us. And we just remember being shocked when the answer came back. It was like, great, when do you want to shoot it? Are you going to hire the line producer or are we? And I guess what I feel now more than ever is that artists need a place where they can be patronized, in that old school way. Like, who are those new Medicis? Who are those people that are like stepping in to let artists be artists away from the demands of the marketplace, allowing them to just be creative in a way that sometimes the market is too shy to back or to try and carve out shelf space that doesn't even exist in the market yet. And it has to come from places like this. It has to come from places that have the finance, but also the philosophy to kind of go like, have at it, do your thing. And that's the journey that we went on then with the short film, which is to say won an Oscar. And it was a really gratifying moment for all of us because it was a piece of work that was so personal to us. It was really drawn from our innermost depths, really, myself and Anil's. And we wanted to share something that was raw with people. And for it to be received like that was really gratifying.
I would double tap you telling people to go watch it because I rewatched it in preparation for this interview and found myself weeping all over again. I'm not even kidding you. Like, it's that the way everything ratchets up toward the end, and of course the ending itself, it is heartbreaking, and it just makes me, it wasn't made that long ago, but it now feels so pressing and so important in this moment with everything that we're seeing in regards to immigration policies and rhetoric, and of course, lethal force of ICE and all of that. So for me, it's like, I wonder, when you make something like that is so powerful, how do you evaluate the impact of your work? Like, what are your measures of success outside of just getting the thing done? Because we can't overlook that. Like, that's an achievement in itself, but your work has such meaning behind it. So how do you go about measuring the impact of that work?
Yeah, it's a really important question, right? Because it kind of touches on this idea of like, how do we measure success? So I think it is really important for artists to start thinking about like, what are my own benchmarks of success and or impact? I think you're right, like getting it done. If there's something that's your own passion project, getting it made is like, I try and think of it as a point of view of like, it's already a success. If you're proud of it, if it was different to have what you set out to achieve, but it surprised you in some way, you grew from it, you learned from it. Increasingly, I try and frame success in that way because I always feel like I'm coming up short. I never feel satisfied with my own work. So I've tried to shift away from, instead of how could it be better, try and think, by the way, it's a real effort to try and think like this. I have to really twist my arm to think like this at times, but just to try and go, what did I learn? How did I grow? And so I really try and hold on to those things more than anything now. Having said that, I'm interested in creativity is a major way of shifting culture and creating ripples in culture. And so for a film like The Long Goodbye, like, we wanted people to be talking about it. We wanted people to be moved by it. We wanted a kind of depth of impact. And we knew that if we could move people, then it might move something in the culture in some small way. And I think that's like my greatest hope for anything I do, is that just in some minuscule way, incrementally, along with everyone else in this long relay race, we're just all trying to inch culture forwards and stretch it in some way. So in the abstract sense, I guess that's a thing I kind of hold on to, a kind of mission.
We're going to take a quick break here, and when we're back, Riz dives deeper into that mission with his new role as a guest curator for WePresent. And we're back with multi-hyphenate Riz Ahmed. As we were just discussing, Riz won an Oscar for his short film The Long Goodbye, which was commissioned by WePresent, the arts platform of file sharing service WeTransfer. And last year, Riz's relationship with the company evolved into him assuming the role of guest curator, which WePresent describes as, quote, an opportunity for the platform to hand over the reins to today's leading visionaries to champion their favorite emerging or overlooked talents while also collaborating on one-off projects that have the ability to start cultural conversations, end quote. So, of course, I had to ask Riz what cultural conversations he's looking to start.
The first thing I was really excited to do was just to shine a light on some amazing artists who I really admire and respect. And that's everything from creators like Nadir Nadi to Bhangra artists from South London like Raf Sapera, Venice Lion winning filmmaker Imran Peretta, and just kind of like shine a light on people who are exciting me, who I think really, in this relay race are like running with the ball now and moving things forwards. This guiding principle of stretching culture is something that I think WeTransfer responded to. It's like a kind of like a bit of a mantra or a mission that I always try and hold on to at my production company or in the work I do. More than anything, because it's an invitation to try and stretch myself and try and step out my comfort zone. At its best, that is what culture does. I think at its best, we're like asking people to step out of their comfort zone, out of their immediate experience, and through that kind of empathy engine of story, go to a new place and recognize themselves in the other. And I guess what I'm fearful of is that we might be reverse coursing on that a little bit, just with the political winds that are blowing around the world and how that gets tied into like the political pressure on the marketplace. And we've made a few steps forwards, but that we might be, shrinking.
For sure. And that I was going to actually ask that because, I have this question. How do you stretch culture when many of the controlling forces in the world have such a narrow view of what culture should and shouldn't be?
That's a beautiful question. Yeah, I think that is a question for us right now. That's a question for all of us as artists right now. And I think a question that almost comes before that is for artists to remind themselves, or ask themselves, what is their role? What is the role of an artist? And I would say that the role of an artist is something that is not political. It actually transcends and predates like the idea of the political. It's the role of the artist is to insist on our oneness. It's to expand the scope of who and what is considered human. You see this crazy painting, you see all this paint just thrown up on this canvas. That's also human. That's in you, that's in me. We're one. And let's go to that place together, You see this film, you see this character you've never met before, this world you've never entered before, you find yourself there, in all these different ways, or a piece of music. I think it's about expanding the scope of who and what is considered human. And in doing so, it's to kind of like insist on our oneness, that this too is part of the human experience. This too is part of your experience, audience member, listener, viewer. Even if you've never had it, you can connect to it in an emotional way. That means this experience is also yours. And so I think that insisting on our oneness is the role of the artist. And personally, at this moment in my, evolution, that's what I believe. And I don't think that's political, but sadly, that seems to now be a political statement. To insist that underneath the differences that separate us, we are all essentially the same. That used to be quite an uncontroversial idea, not least because culture, storytelling, a lot of the basics of empathy only function if that is true. So clearly that is true. And yet that truth seems to be contested now. And so like, I do feel that artists need to remind themselves of their role, that we need to remind each other and encourage each other and give each other heart in rising to that role. Even if some people now think that truth is controversial, it still remains a truth.
Yeah, insist on our own oneness, empathy engine of storytelling. Like you have such a way with words, and this is why I encourage everyone to read this manifesto that you wrote for WePresent, because I think you had such clarity on how you view creativity. And one thing that I found very compelling was you linking creativity to almost like the divine, like, and how you feel like that's missing. And I thought that that was such an interesting approach to how we talk about creativity, because I think that word and that concept has become, not to police how people use it, but I think it's kind of become watered down or co-opted by certain people that just feel like, oh, like creativity has almost become corporatized in a way. And so to hear you write about it in such almost like, I don't want to say abstract, but like, I mean, you say like there's a mystery here, there's a mysticism here. So again, I encourage everyone to read Riz's manifesto because it's fascinating. But like, I'd love if you can just touch on it briefly, like what your relationship to creativity is with you right now, because I think like what you wrote was so beautiful. So I'd love it if you can just sort of, put a finer point on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of almost feel shy talking about it sometimes because it can sound pretentious or insane. But the more I kind of like, the further I go down the road of just life, the more I know that life's most transcendent moments are when you forget yourself, right? When you're so present, it's kind of like your sense of self dissolves into the moment. And I think that's called flow state. That's at the heart of creativity. That's at the heart of meaningful connection. And the thing is I would kind of like fool around looking for the language and the paradigms to like couch that experience in, looking at acting books or reading kind of like books about creative purpose and technique. And what I find increasingly is that like we've removed that kind of language, the language of transcendence and the language of mystery from how we think about creativity often. And I've been really glad to see that kind of re-enter the, our conversations around creativity. In particular, Rick Rubin's book is written as a kind of Taoist text that really is steeped in ideas of like Sufism and Taoism and swimming with the current and what it means to kind of like surrender control and be part of something bigger, to invite something bigger to take charge of your creative process. It's interesting because thinking about this podcast, it's called Creative Control. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I kind of think those two things often don't go together. At least for me, I feel like I'm most creative when I'm kind of not in control, at least not consciously in control.
Yeah.
You need to develop your craft, and that's about control.
Rename my podcast, please. You have...
No, I guess I'm just saying... oh, man, I didn't mean like that. I just meant that.
No, please, we'll talk about this. Your people call my people, and you'll rename this podcast. And I'll listen. I'll talk to my powers of being and be like, Riz anointed this new name for this podcast.
No, I mean, I guess, and it's probably more a reflection on me and my limitations, that I feel at my most creative when I'm not in control. I think when I'm in control personally, I may not be true for other people, I suck. When I'm trying to be in control and I'm really kind of managing and steering the kind of creative process. So yeah, it's I think that this idea of like surrender, transcendence, flow, this language is actually more present in kind of spiritual texts and spiritual traditions than it is in writing about creativity. Or at least that's been the case in like, our conservatoires and in the places where we learn creativity and we taught creativity in the West, at least, for a very long time. I know, I just think that that's kind of interesting. And because I don't think it was always like that. I think back in the day, we used to talk about the muses. We used to locate the creative spark outside of ourselves. And in doing so, we would open up our minds and hearts, humble our ego and be receptive. You know what I mean? And we'd forget ourselves. And when you're being not self-conscious, that's when you're in flow. That's when you're creative. That's when things happen. We used to talk about the muses. We talk about the genies. We used to talk about the ancestors. We talk about the spirits. In Sufism, there's the idea of fana, which is transcendence. And that's very similar to the root of the word for art, which is fun. So I started realizing that in other cultures and then also in the West long ago, we would think about creativity in this frame of mystery, spirituality, and transcendence. And I kind of feel like that's a better description of how it works and how it feels.
That's so beautiful. And I definitely want to leave time to talk about Hamlet because, my God, Riz, first of all, congratulations, because like it is truly an incredible film, and I think sits squarely within this idea of stretching culture, because here you have this timeless story that you and your frequent collaborator now have really shown through this unique prism. It's such a fascinating take on this story that I think most of us know. We know the fundamentals of, I suppose. So I'd love it if you can just sort of walk us through how this came together, because I feel like this was like 14 years in the making or something like that, like some incredible lead time into this project. And just like tell us about like what you hope to accomplish by framing the story the way that you did, because it was just really, really well done in this in this conversation, in this framework of stretching culture.
In terms of like where this came from high school. You know, like most people, I was introduced to Shakespeare in high school. Like most people, I felt like it was not for me. It felt like the epitome of everything I was outside of. And I was lucky to have an amazing English teacher who took me under his wing and showed me this play, Hamlet, and it really summed up how I was feeling. And more than that, as I started reading it, I saw the overlap between this quintessentially British play at the heart of the canon, you know, of the dramatic canon, and my own lived experience as a British South Asian. You know, there were so many elements of it. This story about family, duty, honor, who you can and can't marry, spirituality, the family business. You know, there's all these elements. I was like, wow, this feels so alive when you think about it in those terms. It felt very real to me, rather than feeling outdated. And so it was really back then as a 17-year-old, I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we like did a Hamlet, but set it in like the kind of community that wasn't so different to mine? And wouldn't that reframe it for people? And it was really a passion project, really, ever since then, to try and tell a version of this classic myth, this beautiful, timeless story, and maybe challenge people's ideas and stretch their ideas about who belongs in these stories and who these stories belong to and how universal they truly are. And so, yeah, we went on a 15-year-long journey development. And it was 10 years into that I made the short film with Anil that you mentioned. And then we realized, oh, wow, we need someone who's a rap music video director who can do poetry and action. And that's what we just did in our short film. He's the guy to unlock it. And that's exactly what he did.
Absolutely. And in the little time I have left with you, because I know you are an incredibly busy person. Actually, funnily enough, in researching this, I remembered that our now CEO of our company interviewed you for our Most Productive People issue in 2021, I believe. So yeah, I'm like, I know you're insanely busy. But if you think about the work that you've been doing, the work that you're doing with WeTransfer, the work you're doing, you know, just outside of it, what do you see it laddering up to? Like what I mentioned earlier that, you know, it's been 20 years since you entered into the film and TV industry. So what do you see your next evolution being? I know you don't necessarily want to be in control, quote unquote. But when you think about all the work that you've been doing, the work that you've been building, what do you see as sort of like the next evolution of that work?
It's a great question. You know, generally I like to go towards a place where I, like I said, don't feel in control, or I feel a bit out of my depth. I feel like when I have that slight terror in me of, I don't know how to do this, I'm going to screw this up, it focuses my mind. It's slightly exciting. And it's an opportunity to grow, which I get a buzz out of, and learn. So try and kind of follow that, you know, in terms of going from project to project. But I guess more generally speaking, I'm interested in telling stories that I'm interested in. That doesn't feel like too basic a thing to say. I want to tell more of my own stories, I guess. I love acting. I love, you know, going to work as an actor for other people. And I hope to continue to do that until I'm very old and very grey. But I've been really enjoying kind of building projects like Hamlet, building projects like Bates, our TV series, or building the short film that we did. And I don't know, I just find that very satisfying, very challenging in many different ways, an opportunity to grow. And I guess I just feel like there are certain stories that I really want to see out there. And I think I started to realize that I've just got to tell them myself, if I want them to exist in the world. So I think going forwards, I'd like to be doing more of that, having had a taste of it more recently, producing Hamlet and show running Bates. I'd like to just keep exploring that lane if I can.
You'll forever be that Oxford boy throwing his parties and making space for yourself and other people. It's a beautiful thing, Riz. Thank you so much for your time and just for the art that you've been putting into the world. It's truly incredible. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you very much.
That is going to do it for this episode of Creative Control. As always, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and do not be afraid to leave a comment or two because it is always nice to hear from you. Creative Control is part of the Fast Company Podcast Network. Our show is produced and edited by Blake Odom. Hi, Blake.
Okay.
With help from Sam Gebauer, Hawa Tori, and Miriam Caparitze. Mix and sound design is by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Once again, be sure to subscribe to Creative Control on your platform of choice, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Okay.